When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 492, The Battle of Volkhov River. Leningrad is to be saved. Last time, we covered Stalin's moves after his initial counterattacks that saved Moscow. Now the Soviet premier wanted Army Group Center gutted with his own encirclement of enemy troops. Yet such an attempt was too much, too soon for the Soviet command/body politic. Though German troops were still being lost, what with Stalin's attacks, the Axis troops now fought to keep the Russians at bay, and that with their pullback ordered by Hitler on January 15th, that saved Army Group Center to fight another day. The first of the second round of Soviet counterattacks was the Kursk-Oboyan operation covered last time. Located 200 miles or 341 kilometers due south of Kaluga, the Soviet thinking was, by hitting Army Group Center's far right flank and the far left flank of Army Group South, a wedge could be driven between them. Then both lines could be rolled up by Soviet forces heading due north and due south respectively. Yet it was not to be. Kursk was not even reached, and Oboyan, though entered, was retaken by the Germans after a successful counterattack. As for the connected Barvenkovo-Lozoyava offensive operation further south, the attempted feint there actually backfired on the Soviets. Their initial attack punched holes in the German lines, but these were soon checked, though a Russian salient was created by this attack and German counterattack. And in the coming months, that same salient would be cut off by the Germans and destroyed. Another 300,000 defenders gone. Point is, here and at the Kursk area, the Russian advance, Stalin's advance, had been stalled. The next operation was to hopefully, eventually, relieve Leningrad by destroying the forces that encircled it. Called the Battle of Volkhov River, here too, Stalin's eyes were bigger than his stomach. Just below Lake Ladoga, itself due east of Leningrad, were 2 Soviet armies, the 8th and 54th. Their job was to make sure that Axis forces did not push their way any more east below Lake Ladoga. And just below the anvil that was the 8th and 54 armies, Stalin would swing his hammer, or more like a knife, into the guts of the German defenses below Lake Ladoga. Positioned along the line of no man's land from north to south was the soon-to-arrive Soviet 4th Army, the 59th Army, 2nd Shock Army, and the 52nd Army. They were all to push west by northwest and, if successful, would end up just below the southern German perimeter around Leningrad. But before the fighting commences, let's bring this area up to speed. Leningrad had been under siege since early September. Starvation had already set in by January 1942, and the daily shelling of the inhabitants did not help. The ring around Leningrad was getting tighter by the day, but it was not perfect. No, there was one rail line that went out of the city to Lenevo on Ladoga's shore, then it went to Volkhov, and then it went to Tikhvin, and from there on to Moscow. It had to be closed off as Hitler would not allow infantry from Army Group North to enter the city. To engage in urban street fighting would have been costly, in terms of resources, time, and lives. No, better those inside starved until they surrendered, or were all dead. Either would do. But that rail line was proving hard to cut, so Hitler came up with an indirect attack to sever the connection. The Volkhov River runs south to north from Lake Ilmen through the city of Volkhov to Lake Ladoga. The attack plan was to cross the river in force south of Volkhov, push east, and then north to reach Tikhvin itself. With a major rail hub in German hands, Leningrad would know new levels of deprivation. Specifically, General Rudolf Schmidt's 39th Motorized Corps was to cross the Volkhov River and then make for Tikhvin. After that, it would head further north to hook up with the lackadaisical Finnish troops who seemed not much interested in going beyond their own borders. General Schmidt would be taking with him 2 panzer and 2 motorized divisions, plus 1 infantry division. But clearly, they could not spend their time guarding their own southern border as they raced to the northeast. So that would be handled by the 250th Azul, or Blue Division of Spanish volunteers. This division was a thank you to the Axis powers from Franco for their help during the Spanish Civil War. Blue Division's commander was a Major General Agustin Munoz Grandes, and he was attached to the group called Group von Rock, led by General Franz von Rock. They assembled just north of Lake Ilmen and ready to cross. Not only would they be guarding General Schmidt's southern flank, they would hopefully be drawing enemy units to themselves instead of Schmidt. And if everything truly went well, then once they were across, they could set up jump-off points or bridgeheads on the eastern shore of the Volkhov River. And things started out well enough with this attack. Blue Division, the southernmost unit, started shelling the Soviets across the river from them on October 16, 1941. The Soviets returned the favor, expecting an advance at any second. But it did not come. No, instead, another unit just north of Blue Division started crossing over, hopefully catching the Soviets unawares. This worked. The more northern unit, Major General Paul Laux's 126th Infantry Division, crossed over, as did the Blue Division 2 days later on October 18th. It was no easy thing, though. As soon as the Spaniards started crossing, they came under fire, but stuck to their training. Eventually, parts of waves of men reached the eastern shore of the Volkhov River and set up defenses. This allowed others to reach them relatively more safely, and the Spanish line on that side of the river grew. Soon, the Blue Division and Laux's 126th Division linked up and moved out. Things were going well again. But now came the hard part. Between the swamps and thick woods, there were only so many avenues to travel, and these were heavily guarded. The fighting quickly grew intense and did not let up. Meanwhile, with the 126th and Blue Division guarding the right flank of Schmidt's force, 1st Army Corps units, starting at a place just west of the city of Volkhov, moved out towards that city, while protecting Schmidt's left flank. But like the right flank, the men of this left flank soon ran into serious resistance, and their advance was stalled. And yet, they were drawing off Soviet forces from Schmidt's path. This may work after all. But soon the main attack of Schmidt's got bogged down as well, like his flanks, and then came the rains, which turned everything into mud. The last days of October and the first days of November were spent by both sides fighting each other while fighting the weather. Then the cold winds came. Soon the mud was frozen. The panzers and trucks moved out again.
I'm James McComb, reporting live from home in my bathrobe and slippers. Tonight, we're talking Dunkin' Polar Peppermint Coffee. Gene's here with the latest. Gene, do you copy?
The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be.
Schmidt's men, once again underway, approached and captured Tikhvin on November 8th, their goal. Don't get me wrong, it was hard going, but the Soviet defenders before them were simply overwhelmed. And yes, that had helped Schmidt and company reach Tikhvin, but they weren't going any further. Not anytime soon. Reports came into Army Group North that 2 reserve enemy armies appeared just east of Tikhvin. Schmidt, he was done for now. Still, mission accomplished. The rail line was cut. Leningrad would starve. Even worse for the Soviets, Group von Beckmann's men reached the outskirts of Volkhov that same day, November 8th. Yet they were denied entry. Clearly, the fighting, according to the weather, was over for the year, or it should have been. But Army Group North's commander, von Lieb, did not like the look of his map now. The Soviets were fighting, but not only to retake Tikhvin, no, they were fighting all along the Volkhov River. Soviet shells were raining down on German defensive works. This was partly to bleed the enemy while the Germans stood still, but also Moscow did not want any part of Army Group North being sent south to help Army Group Center, because they were already closing in on Moscow by mid-November. The fighting continued, despite the weather. Near Tikhvin, the Soviets used their artillery to keep the Germans in check, and on the east side of the Volkhov River, at least 3 Soviet rifle divisions attacked the 126th Infantry Division's positions there. But back to the Spanish Blue Division that was still with General von Rock, they were now a part of the 38th Army Corps. But no matter the help that they were given, Soviet units broke through their lines, retook a few of those defensive positions the Germans had just crossed over to build, and Blue Division watched as the dropping temperatures finished off their wounded each and every night. To wit, Major General Laux ordered a general retreat for his part of the attacking line. The Soviets had withstood another assault once again. As things now stood, the men of General Both's 1st German Army Corps had been stopped just 6 kilometers away from Volkhov. But they had been stopped. And the Blue Division lost men every hour as the Soviets attacked and attacked again, which led Schmidt's men holding Tikhvin without his flanks covered. So Soviet General Meretskov and his 4th Army was tasked with harassing Schmidt's men, while 2 other armies attacked their immediate right and left flanks. But again, the Soviets' coordination was lacking. Thus, the Germans were able to focus on one threat at a time. And because of this, their line would hold. For now. On December 5th, an intense cold front moved in, followed by the first of Stalin's counteroffensives. The German troops closest to Moscow felt this first. But near the Volkhov River, the Soviet 4th Army tried again to retake Tikhvin. The area around the city changed hands several times, but it was the Germans who suffered more, as their summer uniforms were no match for General Winter. About 18 kilometers or 11 miles east of Volkhov, the Soviets took a town that had a good access road, which meant men in trucks could move up and down the line, showing up anywhere in relative strength behind the German front line. Added to this, the Spanish Blue Division was losing men fast, all the while backing up. Back to Tikhvin, as parts of 5 Soviet armies came at the city, it was soon surrounded on 3 sides. Clearly, this was going to go the Russians' way, at least for now, which is something that even Hitler allowed himself to acknowledge. So, on December 8th, he ordered Schmidt to fall back to the western side of the Volkhov River. Tikhvin and all its bauxite, which is used to make aluminum, was abandoned. Further, the rail line, or the Road of Life as it would become known, was reopened. But even the retreat was a close-run thing, with the Soviets running to keep up with the retreating Germans. But here, the same snow that had hurt the Germans' advance now hurt the Soviets' charge. Schmidt's forces made it back across the Volkhov River, but they were much worse for wear. Of the 2 panzer divisions that had crossed over, each one of them was now down to 30 tanks. The 18th Motorized Division only had 741 men left who could still fight. They had started out with at least 12,000. And the 2 flanking units, including the Blue Division, were equally decimated. As of mid-December, back to Army Group North, there were Soviet ski units who were fighting their way to the city of Kurishi, which sits on the Volkhov River to the southeast of the city of Volkhov. The Stavka's idea was that if Kurishi could be taken, then it could be used as a staging area to cross the Volkhov in force. But General Both's German First Army Corps was attempting to prevent this from happening. As December went by, the fighting in this area settled down on both sides of the Volkhov River. Both groups of men were exhausted and just waiting for reinforcements. And both sides were now dealing with nighttime temperatures of minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. During the Christmas season, Stalin decided to give himself a gift. That gift would be attacking the enemy all the way up and down the line, from Leningrad to the Black Sea, as much as it was possible. So the Stavka, wanting to give him this gift, got busy making plans. Whether the quartermasters would be able to outfit this swelling Soviet force was another question altogether. On January 4th, 1942, General Fenyuninsky's 54th Soviet Army attacked enemy positions just east of Kurishi, but it was a poorly thrown-together operation. No surprise there. Units were not in place at 0 hour. Those who were in place were not properly supplied. Still, the men who could set off and drove the Germans back 5 kilometers. And then 2 divisions of the 11th and 126th Soviet armies got into good position, and they were able to kill many Axis troops, which is when Brigadier General Harp's 12th Panzer Division showed up and eventually pushed back the Soviet 54th Army. The retreat had been on January 5th, the next day, and General Meretskov ordered other parts of his army forward. Why, with the 54th retreating? Because Meretskov was not in charge, at least not in charge of the timetable. That was being controlled by the Stavka, and all the while, Stalin was watching them. Thus, the next part of the plan that was going wrong from the start, was to have the Soviet 59th Army head out from the Volkhov River, from below Kurishi, and make for Luban. If that town could be reached, then Russian troops would be 30 miles or 48 kilometers south of the German perimeter around Leningrad. After the 59th Army crossed the Volkhov and got the Germans' attention, then the 2nd Shock Army would cross the Volkhov from further south and then head to the northwest to also make for Luban. This city was to be the staging area that saved Leningrad, and thus it got 2 armies. The 2nd Shock Army was the second to last formation on the Soviet left flank. The last one was the 52nd Army. They, the 52nd, were to cross over as well, but instead of turning right or to the north, they were to turn south and hit Novgorod. Much like the retreating Soviet 54th Army, much of this massive force was not in place, or not in the right place. They did not have enough food, ammo, or water. But the Stavka had spoken. Stalin's latest counterattack got underway on January 6th. Normally, the attack would have started with an artillery bombardment, and this one did, but it was over in a few minutes, as there were not enough shells brought to the front for the Soviet guns. So the Soviet forces jumped into small watercraft and started paddling across the 400-meter-wide Volkhov River. As the Russian artillery attack had been weak, the Germans started shooting at the Soviets as they first started to cross. Many Russian troops were lost, but they kept coming. Eventually, some made it over and started forming a bridgehead. By the end of that day, January 6th, there weren't nearly as many men on the river's west bank as planned by the Stavka, but there were some. The process had started. As the 2nd Shock Army got into position last, Meretskov ordered it to move out 1 day late. But the man in charge was more loyal than knowledgeable or experienced. So soon, within minutes of the men crossing, 3,000 of them were dead. The Soviets on the far left had no artillery, no air support, just men with rifles rushing fixed positions. In fact, it was so bad, even the pro-fighting Stavka ordered advancements here to be halted on January 10th, as clearly it was a waste of time and lives. Instead, the Second Shock Army was ordered to consolidate their western bridgehead. Meanwhile, on the attacking right wing, the Soviet Fourth Army, just below Kurishi, had it equally rough. The 65th and 4th Rifle Divisions of the Soviet Fourth Army went in south of Kurishi, but were immediately set upon by two German forces. The Soviets here moved in a bit, were hit hard, but quickly set up a defensive line. The attack here was quickly stalled, but the Germans were also contained. Someone might have had the courage to tell Stalin, "Beggars can't be choosers."
Blinds.com is kicking off the savings early with Black Friday mega deals all month long. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can even handle everything from measure to your whole home install for just one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Get up to 45% off site-wide, plus premium doorbusters and a free professional measure. Now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
It would be the southern end of this attack that would have the most success, relatively speaking. Just north of Novgorod, there was a gap between the German 126th and 215th Infantry Divisions. The Russians found this and poured men through. Then they turned left or south as they were ordered to make for Novgorod. As the German 126th Infantry Division was close to collapsing, given all the fighting it had done recently, before the day was out, the Soviets took a town near Novgorod and then took Novgorod itself, not to mention the road that went from Novgorod to Chudova to the north. The Spanish Blue Division were ordered in part to help retake the area, but even more Soviet troops kept showing up, keeping the Axis forces at bay. At this point, the Stavka ordered a halt to their various attacks. Land had been gained, villages required, and more enemy troops were dead. But clearly, there was a lack of professionalism among the Soviet mid-level officers. Transportation was still an issue, not to mention supplies, like food and ammunition. But the replacements did little better. On January 13th, the Soviet offensive here was resumed. And right away, the Second Shock Army, under new aggressive leadership, started making gains against the enemy. Alas, the less experienced officers fighting alongside their men got to a point where the desperate German 126th Infantry Division quickly threw together some defensive works around them. Now, a more knowledgeable officer might have said, "This redoubt is not our priority. Moving further northwest is, so we will leave a detachment here to keep these enemy troops penned in." But that's not what happened. The Soviet troops here, having the front relatively open to them, instead amassed their men and then started rushing at the 126th makeshift barrier. Makeshift it might have been, but behind it were machine guns and artillery pieces. And the Russians, using their straight-ahead attack tactics, soon had hundreds of their men on the ground. Thanking the gods for this bit of luck in the form of Russian stupidity, Army Group North Commander von Lieb was looking at his map and could see for himself that his entire area of operation, i.e. Leningrad, but most importantly below it, was in danger of being lost. So he sent Hitler a request for Army Group Center to fall back. But on January 17th, von Lieb, as a reply, was sacked, supposedly for health reasons, and in his place now was 18th Army Commander George von Kuchler. Also on January 17th, when von Lieb was relieved, General Meretskov called for another halt and brought up more reinforcements. The next day, his men were back on the attack and managed to take several enemy strongpoints, as well as expand the bridgehead on the west side of the Volkhov River. Further gains could have been made when the fighting resumed, but the Russians' lack of supplies stopped them from truly exploiting their breakthroughs. Besides shells, the attackers had little to eat. All the Russians had was pea soup. But when one of their horses died, at least they got some meat. After moving troops around, Meretskov ordered the assault to begin again. A break in the German line soon occurred, and this time Meretskov was ready with additional fresh troops who would dash through and get into the German rear. The Axis formations reacted by 1, attacking those in their rear, and 2, sending reinforcements to either side of the breach. Perhaps they were looking to close this breach and then pursue the Russian troops who made it through. If so, the Germans were in for somewhat of a surprise. Meretskop's screaming and his close connection to Stalin got him an award, and that award was a few tanks were sent to him instead of Moscow. Yes, there were marshes all over the place, but something had to change, and hopefully the introduction of these few tanks was the ticket. As the Second Shock Army was making headway, soon a German salient was emerging. Perhaps this would be the great cauldron that Stalin had been looking for, namely, to surrender and wipe out an entire enemy force, all the while getting that much closer to Leningrad. But it was not on the cards for the Germans in this early 1942. The Soviet fighting would stop and start as supplies reached the front line. The marshy terrain did not help, and at least here, the Germans were doing better with their supplies, with their communications, and with their reinforcements. If not at first, certainly by the end of January. And this would be the end of Stalin's great counteroffensive that was supposed to end the war in the East in 1942. But as there were numerous Russian attacks going on, this forming Battle of Luban, not quite finished, was only the right wing of a much larger Soviet operation, which was to have saved Leningrad. For while this fighting was going on, Strauss's 9th Army of Army Group Center was about to be bypassed and all but cut off, and its mettle was about to be tested as never before. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I don't believe I have any new members since last week, but I did get 3 donations. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's see here. Chad Reinhardt. Thank you very much, Chad. Nick Justo. I hope I said that right, Nick. And Anthony DeLuca, who has donated several times. So thank you very much, Big Tony. I appreciate it. So as we can see, what it is Stalin is thinking bigger than he's ever thought before. So he has a right wing that's, but even though it has its subparts, is going after the southern part of Leningrad, while the left wing is hopefully going to scoop up apart the left flank of Army Group Center. So he's thinking bigger than he ever has before. That's good as a commander, except it helps when you have enough men who are trained and have enough supplies, and the supplies are with the men and they're ready to go. As we can see, he's rushing all of his men before they're in place, before they have supplies, before they even have food, before they even have guns. So again, it's his desperation, it's his drive that's pushing this. The men are paying the price, but it cannot be argued. It is having the desired effect.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.
Hey, history fans, if you enjoy listening to podcasts like The History of World War II, then you'll love Airwave History Plus, now available on Apple Podcasts. Airwave History Plus is your ticket to ad-free listening to the history of World War II, plus bonus content and early episodes from dozens of the most popular history podcasts, including History That Doesn't Suck, the Explorers Podcast, The History of the Great War, the American Revolution Podcast, The History of the Second World War, The Age of Napoleon, and more. To get your free 7-day trial, go to the Apple page for the History of World War II and hit subscribe, or search Airwave History Plus on Apple Podcasts. Airwave History Plus, the essential audio destination for history lovers.